Goldberg was born in Brooklyn and grew up in 5 towns on Long Island. She raised her daughter Maggie in Ardsley, New York. Lisa received her bachelor's degree from Vassar College and her master's degree in international affairs from Columbia School of International and Public Affairs. She now lives in Coconut Grove, Florida, with her husband, Stan Blake. The Apple and the Shady Tree is her first book, which she is now shopping for a possible TV series. Please welcome Lisa Novick Goldberg.
Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you. I really appreciate you coming out in your bathrobe and slippers and whatever else to come and see me tonight. With everything that's going on between the pandemic and the elections, this is very heartfelt for me. And I must tell you, when I heard Toledo, I was very excited. My husband's mother, who died 2 years ago at 102 years old, is from Toledo, Betty Jaffe. And my great aunt and uncle owned a jewelry store in Toledo, and my mother as a child used to go on the pacemaker train out of New York and come and visit. So I feel this connection. And if there's anybody in the audience that's about 165 years old, we can talk later if you know my family and Stan's family. So let me get started. I don't know who has read the book, so I just want to read my introduction, which will give you a better understanding of what the whole book is about. They say that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, as Judy said. I'd like to think that this Macintosh took a long roll into another orchard, but I'm not sure. I'm going to let you judge. This is a book about my family, the Novicks, who are at best described as unusual. It is about my complicated relationship with my father, whose closest friends just happen to be the bosses of the Genovese crime family. It is about my search to find myself, having spent a lifetime straddling two very distinct worlds. One as an upper middle class suburban girl who attended elite schools, ran in privileged circles, and identified strongly with her Judaism. And the other as a sort of mafia princess whose upbringing gave access to another kind of elitism and privilege and landed me in front of a grand jury. The story is told from my perspective. You are introduced to my father, Herbert Novick, born into a poor Jewish family in 1928 in the rough and tough Brownsville neighborhood of Brooklyn, made infamous as the home of Murder, Inc. A job as a teenager on the Brooklyn dockyards changed his fate when he met the men who became his lifelong friends, the men who then went on to become the capos of the powerful Genovese family. It is then that Herbie Novick morphed into John or Johnny or Big John Novick. You will meet his bride, my stunning but deeply troubled mother, who was a formidable match in their explosive 53-year marriage. The genetic shortcomings and poor choices created a chaotic home for my sister and me, characterized by anger and fear, disappointment and confusion. I have been far luckier than my sister, who could never overcome the abuse of being used as a pawn in our parents' battles. Through chronological vignettes, both very funny and profoundly sad, I take you on my journey from early childhood in Brooklyn to the wealthy Jewish ghetto known as the 5 towns of Long Island, where I grew up, to my adulthood with its twists and turns, challenges, and triumphs. Beginning with a murder, I introduce you to the real-life Goodfellas, who came in and out of my life courtesy of my father's role as the moneymaker for the Genovese family. We will visit the mafia-infused worlds of the casinos of glitzy 1960s, 70s, and 80s Las Vegas and Atlantic City, the boxing industry, Manhattan's iconic garment center, the pre-MTV record industry, the restaurants where mob business deals were made and celebrated, and a corrupt boutique bank that was tied to the mob murder. So join me, it's quite a ride. So I am 62 years old. This is my first book. At 57 years old, I decided I've got to do something with my life. I've worked, I had degrees, whatever, but because of the anxiety and the depression, which is a genetic shortcoming in my family on both sides, I was not able to hold the types of positions in corporate America or in the State Department, things that I had studied and been groomed for. And I figured this is my last shot. So I said, I can write, and I certainly have an unusual story to tell. It took me 5 years to write. And as Judy had said, it is being shopped for a movie deal now. It's received a lot of good press. And I want to tell you about the themes of my book. The obvious theme is the apple and the shady tree. Where did I get that name from? Part of it is a double entendre. The apple, me, the shady tree, my father. But there's another reason. My parents were very bitter battlers. I could just see us on Dr. Phil now, him holding his head and shaking his hand, you're ruining these kids, whatever. When I would take a side with one parent over the other, since they always brought us into everything, my father would say, Lisa, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. You're just like your mother. And my mother would say, conversely, Lisa, I don't know how this happened. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. You're just like your father. And clearly, these were not complimentary things. They weren't saying, gee, you got my eyebrows and his, stamina or whatever. These were not complimentary things. It was a tough upbringing. So that is where the title came from. Various themes emerged in my writing, which I wasn't even aware of when I was writing it. The obvious one is the mafia connection. I was 30 years old when I received a subpoena while working for a Jewish organization. I was a development director for the Israel Tennis Centers, if you're familiar with that. It was right before Christmas. And the FBI came into my office and handed me a subpoena to appear before a grand jury. I was rather naive. I didn't even know what a grand jury was. And I went into shock that it's not quite like it is on TV when they come in and they show you their badge and you think, okay, whatever. It's terrifying. So that is when I really became aware of the extent of my father's involvement in the mafia. We grew up in the 5 towns, as I had said. We were clearly different from all the other families. If you're familiar with the area, it's 99.9% Jewish. My friends were children of doctors and lawyers, business owners, garment center business owners. And here was my family, who my father and mother were clearly different. We looked Italian. My father spoke with a Brooklyn accent. We had different friends. We did not celebrate any of the Jewish holidays. I never did a Rosh Hashanah. I never had a Seder. I never lit Hanukkah lights, which was a big problem to me as a child because I wanted to associate with get to know my Judaism. But that's a whole other story. So we were different. We went to fancy restaurants. We were ushered right in. We had politicians. We had judge friends. We had lawyer friends. I was introduced to everybody, but I knew we were different. We were treated specially. As I said, I did not know the extent until I was pulled in front of a grand jury and I was questioned about my father's relations to the Genovese crime family. I had never even heard of the Genovese crime family until later on in my life. The investigation did not center around my father. The investigation centered around the 5 families in the New York City, the metropolitan area. Rudy Giuliani was the mayor in New York at that time, and he was going after, he was the attorney general, and he was going after everybody, and he did a wonderful job at cleaning up the crime, the 5 families' infiltration in the system. So the mafia is the obvious story that I tell you about. I introduce you to all kinds of characters in the book and tell you about the special treatment that we received in Las Vegas and Atlantic City and in the garment center, and my father's pie in the sky businesses that he developed, which I worked for many of them, not understanding until much later in my life where this money was coming from. Had I been a little more thoughtful about it, I would have been able to say, look, we lived fairly modestly. Where is this money coming from the business? But for whatever reason, maybe from fear or just he was my daddy, I didn't want to know everything. We did have a legitimate business. That was New York pretzel. If you know the pretzels on the streets of New York that are at Madison Square Garden, the vendors, you know, those big lethal weapon things, if they get too hard. We owned the bakery in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, that made those pretzels. On my father's deathbed, I asked a question that I had wanted to know, where did you become a pretzel person? And it was seed money from the head of the Genovese family in the 70s, Funzi Thierry, who was like a father to my father. So that's the mafia theme. That's right out there. The other theme that's that's eclipsed the mafia theme is the mental health theme. I have extreme depression and anxiety on both sides of my family, which I am the first person to publicly acknowledge. Crazy in my family, like every Jewish family crazy, but no one hid it. We were out there in the open. It was not uncommon for my parents to go into a Chinese restaurant and start screaming, and occasionally a spare rib could get thrown or whatever. They just didn't think anything about it. I'm going to read you a quick excerpt. As I said, the book is funny, it's sad, but I'm going to read you some of the humorous parts. Both of my parents were a very good-looking couple. My mother was stunning, a Sophia Loren knockout. There are pictures in the back of the book, but though never clinically diagnosed, she probably suffers from, she is alive, she's 87 years old, she suffers from borderline personality disorder. And if any of you know what that mental illness is, it is not a good diagnosis. There is an inability to form loving attachments. There is wild mood swings, addictions, whether it be sexual addictions or alcohol or whatever. They are unable to form close family attachments. As you can imagine, it was very difficult growing up with a mother like that. My father was not around very much. He was busy building his empire. I was very close to my dad when he was around. I could never get enough of him. I always wanted to be with him more, as is explained in the book. But I don't think that either one of them were able to be the kind of parents that I'm sure most of you are, or the parents that I see from my friends. But that in itself is a whole other story. So let me read you about their courtship, which if you're looking for romantic strolls in the city of New York or whatever, that didn't happen. So this is the first thing. The romantic courtship stories continued with cousin Jakey's engagement party, which was the first time that Janet, my mother, met the extended Novick clan. The party, held at a Chinese restaurant in Syosset, Long Island, featured a simple set menu for the guests. When my mother described the afternoon to me, she had a look on her face as if she was drinking a colonoscopy prep. Lisa, Daddy was always a pain in the ass, such a troublemaker. He was never one to go along with the rules. He wasn't happy with the limited meal choices that were offered, so he called the waiter over to do his own ordering. That's when chaos erupted. That sounds good, said Aunt Selma. I'll have winter melon soup, just like him, she pointed to my father. I'll have bird's nest soup, chimed in Uncle Jules. Hey, Johnny ordered spare ribs, said Soretta. I love spare ribs. Give me an order of spare ribs, too. Make mine an order of roast pork, added a cousin. The disgusted waiter eventually made an announcement. You have a choice of wonton or egg drop soup. No winter melon soup. You have a choice of egg roll or shrimp roll. No spare ribs. You have a choice of chow mein or egg foo young. Chicken lo mein. No shrimp with lobster sauce. No special fried rice. No steak Q. I'd never seen anything like it, Lisa, my mother recounted. They acted like they'd never eaten before. I thought that Jakey was going to have a stroke. You could just see him adding up the bill in his head. My mother said that she is willing to bet that many years ago in some shtetl in Minsk, where my father's relatives came from, there was a big plaque over the door of the village insane asylum that read, Welcome Novicks. So there was a lot of humor in my family, which you'll read. They were characters, my parents. My father was, he wore pleather shoes and there were always stains on his shirt. And he was a wise guy with a cute little grin, actually, a big hulking guy. And they were a formidable match for one another. So there are lots of funny stories. I'm going to read another one. But mental health was a big issue. I have a sister who's 5 years younger than me, who I haven't seen in 15 years. My mother hasn't seen her in probably 25 years. She is a Mensa. She has never worked a day in her life. She's probably paranoid schizophrenic from what I've been told. But out of respect for her, I don't delve into things with her in the book because she is entitled to her privacy. I don't give her name or anything. So the third theme that's emerged from the book is my search for my Judaism. I grew up in Crown Heights, Brooklyn, which if any of you know, that is the home of the Lubavitchers on Eastern Parkway. That is where Chabad is. And as a little girl, my grandma, my maternal grandma, who played a very important role in my life, we would go walking on Eastern Parkway and I would see all these black hats. And in the holidays, I would see the sukkahs, and I was fascinated with this. And Grandma explained that these are Jewish people. And I couldn't understand if they're Jewish and I'm Jewish, why is there's no connection here? They are like from another planet. And she gave me the best explanations that she could. But then we moved to Long Island, which was 99.9% Jewish, and the holidays would come and I would stand outside of my friends' homes and you could see the dining room lights on and you could peek in and see these beautiful tables set with grandma's candlesticks and the best china, and relatives would arrive with gifts and food. And even at 7 and 8 years old, something was missing in me. And I would cry. I would go home to my mother and I would say, why don't we have this? Well, you know, this and that, daddy's not home. They would always shift the blame. I enrolled myself in Hebrew school. I decided that when I got older and I was on my own, I was going to really explore my Judaism. And I did. As soon as I left for college, I got involved with UJA. I got involved with the American Zionist Youth Foundation. I started lighting Shabbos candles. I wasn't real religious, but I was traditional. I always held Rosh Hashanah dinners and invited whoever wanted to come, Jewish or not Jewish. I really wanted to embrace my religion. So those are the three themes that have emerged from the book. And oddly enough, the mental health component has really gotten the most attention. I was in People magazine and I've been on the Daily Mail. I've written quite a few articles, and the articles are mental health articles because I am very open. I put myself out there with my family, how I managed to survive growing up in that kind of situation, that there is help for people. So I make it a public thing. And the more you get out there, the more I'm learning that people are just waiting. If you scratch the surface, everybody has a story. Everybody has a situation, a relative, or whatever. The more we share with one another, the more we can help one another. The last theme, which is much less so, is the power of the human spirit. I really feel that in writing the book, that our past explains us. The book, I had to write this book to understand why I suffer from this anxiety, why I suffer from this depression. And it wasn't until I went into my background and with the help of a wonderful psychoanalyst, was forced to look at what was going on in my life to make me why I am the way I am today, both the good and the bad, the restrictions, the weaknesses that I have, and the strengths that I have. I'll give you just a quick story. When I first started, my husband of the last, we're married 3 years, we're together a total of 8 years. He is a retired circuit court judge in Miami, a very celebrated judge, Stanford Blake. My father would have absolutely loved him, but he said, start your research, Lisa, by contacting the FBI, and they, under the Freedom of Information Act, they are required to give you information. I got back a prompt letter from the FBI saying, Ms. Novick, there are 29,000 references to your father. It's going to take us a little while. Now, God really took care of me because I didn't get 29,000 references back. It was too much for them. They said no. But you can imagine how prepared you have to be for something like that when you didn't think of your father in those terms. So that is my story. I'm going to read you one other excerpt that describes the relationship again between my mother and my father, and I hope you like this. Gives you a little bit. Solomon Solly Boxcars Levine was one of the men who was a constant companion to my father in the crazy years. My mom's all-time favorite daddy story was the time that my parents and Boxcars and his wife were invited to a black tie affair, and they needed to rent tuxedos for the occasion. They went to a place owned by a friend of a friend who fully outfitted them. The proud shoppers came back to my parents' house and, like teenage girls after a trip to the mall, donned their new outfit to show my mother. Solly was resplendent in a powder blue tuxedo trimmed in navy with a huge bow tie and matching cummerbund. My dad sported the same number, but in a light beige with brown trim. The ruffled shirt, this is the 70s, the bow tie and cummerbund made my father look like the dancing bear from the Captain Kangaroo show. My mother was temporarily speechless, and then words of disbelief spilled forth. Are you kidding? You guys look like something from a strolling minstrel show. Johnny, beige, buttercream, he corrected. She continued, you look like an elephant dressed in a tuxedo. Who sold you these costumes? I won't go anywhere with you dressed like that. Boxcars and my father were visibly hurt by her reaction. What do you know, my father retorted. The salesman told us that these are the latest spring colors. Oh, really? She shot back. Johnny, listen to me. You look like a fat Easter bunny. That bow tie, that ruffled shirt. You have no neck as it is. You both look like schmucks. Take them back and get black tuxedos. Not mint green, not lilac, just black. So I've read you some of the funny scenes. The book is also profoundly sad. I buried my father in January of 2010, exactly 1 year after he entered the hospital for heart issues. He had been grossly overweight. He lived life on his terms. He ate massive amounts of Italian food and Chinese food. He did not exercise. He did not have any hobbies other than compulsive gambling. And that was the best year that I ever had with my father. While he was getting his kidney dialysis, we spent hours holding hands and talking and getting to know one another because he was never around. So there were a lot of sad parts, the dynamics between him and me and my mother and him and my sister. We were a codependent, dysfunctional mess that really prohibited one another from really ever achieving our full potential. And I'm still exploring that in psychoanalysis, and I've made a lot of inroads, but it's tough. I suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. I'm certainly not one of those poor children that you read about that's been abused. However, I am not a soldier in Iraq or Afghanistan, but I have learned that stress disorder comes in many different forms. It affects everybody differently depending upon how sensitive person you are, the extent of time that you're exposed to trauma and whatever. So it's a very interesting, it really is an interesting book, and it is being considered now for a TV series, and it's being billed as Mrs. Maisel meets the Goodfellas. That's my pitch, my agent's pitch for me. So I'd like to open up the discussion now for questions. You can ask me anything.
We've got a couple of them, Lisa. The first one's from Anne. She's on our committee and she's read your book. She asks, after your father died, 2 of your father's associates tell you that your dad owed them money. You believed them and paid them. Why did you believe them?
I believe them because I know my father. Okay, let me give you some. My father, we only sat shivered 2 days, which was, I forced my mother to sit. She didn't know from this kind of stuff. On the second day, I came from my home in Westchester, picked her up on Long Island, and we went to the local deli where it was my parents' country club. That's where they hung out with their friends and whatever. My father had been betting he was a sports bettor. He had been betting on the games while in rehab in the hospital. And we are not talking about, $100 here and there. What I did learn in the research we're talking about $50,000 a weekend or whatever. Again, I didn't live like this, so the money had to have been a mob money. As we were leaving the deli, my mother and I, my father hadn't been in the ground 48 hours. 2 of his best friends came over to me and said, "We got to talk to you, Lisa. Your daddy bet on some games and he owes $5,000 and change." And I looked at them, I said, "He's not even, you don't have any respect? It's daddy. Can you give me a break?" And then I said, no, my mother's saying, "Screw it, Lisa, get in the car. And this was one of my father's very closest friends. I said, nope. I took out the checkbook with the savings. They said, "We knew, your dad told us that you would take care of us. You would settle everything." And I did. I wrote them a check for $5,700, whatever it was, and geh gesundheit hate. I never heard from them again. And that was the beginning of closure. That was really because closure took a very long time for me. So yes, I knew these people very, very well, and we are not in touch anymore.
Judy asks if there's a next book.
I think I've got to give this some thought. I have to see where this book takes me. I am enjoying this very, very much. My mazel, I'd write a book during the year of COVID. I was planning on doing an extensive book tour, but this is my extensive book tour, and I love looking into your kitchens and living rooms and dining rooms. So I don't know. I'm thinking about it, but we're going to see first how far this book goes. So.
Were you afraid of mob retaliation?
That's a common question, and honestly, no. There are, for a variety of reasons. One, everybody is either dead or in jail. And one of the parts that I was most frightened of in writing the book is not retaliation of somebody coming and killing me, because these are anecdotes. These are my stories. The facts about everybody who was in jail, what they went to jail for, that I got on the internet. My father did not come home at night and we'd sit at the dinner table and he'd say, you know, we whacked so-and-so today, or, you know, Benny is getting 75 years in jail for the murder. We didn't do any of that. I learned everything online. So my concern was not for these people. My concern was for their families. I grew up with these children, even though we were very different. Most of them lived in the city and they were exclusively Italian. We had different career sites and preparations. I didn't want to throw anyone under the bus, and I wrote the book with that in mind. There are other stories that I don't tell in the book because out of respect for these children who did not want to grow up like their parents. If you watched The Sopranos and you saw Meadow on The Sopranos, Meadow went to Columbia, I went to Columbia. They do not want to be part of their father's world. That ended, I believe, decades ago with the wannabes, whatever. The children wanted to raise families, be in legitimate businesses, and not separate themselves from their families, just be different from their families.
Let's see. Nancy asked, Michael Cohen was raised in the Five Towns area. Did you know
Yes.
him or his family?
He's younger than I am. He's young. I know the school that he went to, and I don't know him personally. As I said, he was younger than me. When I went to college in 1976, I went to Vassar. I never moved back. I left. I had really wanted a split. I had tried to make a split from my parents in terms of, I love them. You must know how much I loved my parents, but there was a codependency that was crippling with all of us. I don't believe I throw my parents under the bus in the book either. The love, particularly from my father, does come through. So,
did you ever feel that you were in danger when you were growing up, even though you didn't know?
No. I thought that my father would be in danger, and I did not know the extent of what he did. You see, I grew up, as I said, with all these kids who sat down at the dinner table at 6 o'clock with their fathers who came home on the Long Island Railroad, and they sat down and talked about their day. I could go an entire week without seeing my father. He never had dinner with us. I was a very sensitive child, and those were the years of, as I describe in the book, the Vietnam War, the Black Panthers, the hippies, the drug years of young runaways with Life magazine and Look magazine. And my parents, because they were not very involved in my life, I was exposed to everything. I watched inappropriate TV shows. So I envisioned my father out where? He didn't have an office like my friends' parents had. Where was my father at night? The Black Panthers were out looking for him. This was in my imagination. And with nobody to comfort me and nobody to tell me otherwise, I developed all kinds of anxiety issues. I was constantly in fear of my parents dying and leaving me alone. That was it. No, I never felt for myself. Never. It's just the opposite. What better friends to be with than these mafia toughs that take very good care of you. And my father was he was a big, hulking man. I felt very protected on the outside. The reality was my home life was chaotic, and I was terrified most of what went on in the house, much more so than what went on in the outside world.
We had another question. Multiple questions. Were you as a child accepted by the other children? Do you think they had any idea what your father did? And then was your father able to leave your mother financially comfortable?
Oh, these are good. You know what? I have not had some of these questions. These are good questions. Everybody knew who we were. You remember the show The Munsters with Fred Gwynn? He plays Herman Munster. And Marilyn, they had this niece, Marilyn, who was beautiful, blonde, whatever. They thought she was, poor Marilyn, she doesn't look like everybody else. Well, that's what my family, particularly what I was like. Everybody knew, the adults knew that my father was connected some way. And he made nothing was hidden. He made no, try to hide it rather. But I fit in because the only chance that I had, as my psychologist explains to me, why I'm not in jail or a drug addict or a mental institution, is because I was able to pick out the best and glom myself onto them. I was a good student. I was popular in school. I was a good athlete. So I had inroads to the families that I wanted to be like. I picked my friends carefully. My best friend's parents were teachers in Brooklyn. The mother was a kindergarten teacher. The father was a principal. They were as vanilla and white bread as can be. And they had their Carvel cake for birthdays and anniversaries, and they lit Shabbos candles, and that's what I wanted. I didn't want to be in Las Vegas and Atlantic City and out in Little Italy. I wanted to be like these people. So I put myself into their homes, basically. And I continued that throughout my life. I attached myself to some of the smartest in colleges. My friends are very educated because that's what I wanted to be. I wanted to break the cycle. So far, so good. Somewhat.
Another question. My dad was in the New Jersey mob. My parents took me to mob parties. I do not understand how my mother could do that to me. Do you feel that way also?
No, these were, if you watch Goodfellas or whatever, no, these were my parents' friends. These were their friends. They didn't play mahjong. They didn't play golf. They weren't part of any clubs or anything. This is all I knew. We went to baptisms, and we went to we went to Christmas and Easter hunts and whatever. I was too young. These were our outings. Later on, as an adult now, no, I don't resent any of that. I see through my research about my parents in the background, they really tried to do their best. They were both uneducated, though my mother is very, very smart, and my father was very, very smart, but they were not formally educated, and they didn't have many paths open to them. They did not have supportive parents on either side. They did the very best that they could, and I acknowledge that. What I don't accept as well as how they used my sister and I brutally as pawns, and that should be more innate, to be good parents and to not want to hurt your children, and to be a little more compassionate. But they couldn't, and my mother much more so than my father. I still have a tremendous amount of anger towards my mother. She's 87. She's in a home in Kendall, Miami. She refuses, because of her illness, she will not, has never ever in my life to me said she's sorry for anything. She takes no responsibility, which is part of borderline personality. My father and I said everything we had to say to one another on his deathbed, and I'm at peace with that. So it's up to me now to move on with my life. No blaming, no whatever, to make the very best of the good and the bad. Like in my, I just want to read you something real quick. My dedication is to my father, whose life lessons, both good and bad, taught with intention or otherwise, made me strong.
Next question. You spoke about your fear of the grand jury appearance. Can you describe how this went and what they asked you about?
I'm not allowed to discuss even my husband's. The retired judge tells me you're still not, even years later, able to discuss what goes on in a grand jury. All I can say is I received a subpoena a week earlier than I appeared before a grand jury. It was just before Christmas. It was freezing cold in New York, and all the Christmas decorations were up, and I had plans to go to parties for Hanukkah and Christmas. And I went into a catatonic state that lasted at least a month. I lost 22 pounds in 3 weeks as a result of being called in front of a grand jury. I had to get a criminal attorney. My father hired me a criminal attorney, and they explained to me why I was going in front of a grand jury. They explained to me first what a grand jury was. And the attorney had said to me, don't worry, Lisa, you'll be in there for 15 minutes. I mean, you didn't do anything, Lisa, so what's going to be? 15 minutes, you'll be out of there. Well, 15 minutes was actually 2.5 hours that I was grilled. When I emerged, I went home with my husband at the time, my ex-husband, and I became delusional. I was terrified. Did I say something that was going to hurt my father? Did I say something that was going to hurt me? When is this going to end? Does this have any ending? This was like my worst fear. Is my father going to go to jail? If he goes to jail, he's going to leave me alone with my crazy mother? How are we going to live? These were the swirling through my head. It wasn't until I was taken to a psychiatrist and I was prescribed Prozac, which was literally on the market for about 6 months, that I was able to get my body calmed down enough to deal with what I was up against. I never got an apology from my father or my mother for, as the book describes, for what they put me through. Quite the opposite. My father's response was, what are you talking about, Lisa? Nothing happened. It was a fishing expedition. Get over it. He never could be compassionate enough to see what it meant to me and how it affected me. And that was a big problem in our relationship, which we later discussed before he died. So.
Let me see. Was the Toledo, I'm going to pronounce this wrong, Licavelli gang in business with your father's associates?
I don't know that name at all. You know, I was asked, I was on the Daily Mail, the TV show, and they were asking me a lot of questions in the interview about the crime families, the different crime families. I'm not a crime family specialist. As I said, I had never really heard of the Genovese crime family until I received the subpoena. I don't know much about it. I don't know the other families. I only know the names of the people who were the top echelon of the Genovese family in the 70s and 80s, the 90s, and the early 2000s, who I grew up with.
Is your husband Jewish, and do you have children who you raised and are still practicing Jewish?
Yes, I have a daughter. She's 30 years old. Her name is Maggie Goldberg, and she lives in Austin. She is my daughter with my first husband, Mark Goldberg, who is an attorney. She suffers from terrible depression and anxiety as well, which was a tremendous disappointment to me because I really thought that with the right amount of love and trying to correct the mistakes my parents made, that I could overcome the genetic shortcomings and we could end this cycle. But it's much more complicated than that. Much more complicated than that. My ex-husband was Jewish, Goldberg. My husband, Stan Blake, I know the name is deceiving. He is Jewish. I have tried to instill Jewish ethics in my daughter, Jewish values, whatever. It's a little tough, but she as she gets older and older, it comes out. She lights Shabbos candles with me when we can together, and she's changing. She's coming to see how important it is, particularly with our background, to have faith, the importance of having faith.
You mentioned your sister hasn't fared so well. Are you still close to her, and have you been able to help her out since you've put some of this behind you?
No, I have not spoken to her in at least 15 years. I do get, I am in touch with social workers from the area where she lives that give me updates, but she is unfortunately beyond the kind of help that I can give her, beyond the kind of love that I can give her. She was rejected by my mother almost from the minute she popped out. She has my parents' very strong will. She has their intelligence. As I mentioned, she is a Mensa, but she cannot function well in the real world. And because she was not attractive and she had all these issues, my mother, because of her problems, rejected her. She lived with us, but it was constant oil and water. And it's the saddest part of my life. I pray for her every day, but through analysis, I learned there's just certain things that you cannot heal. You cannot overcome certain things. Very sad.
Did your parents have siblings, and what kind of relationships did you have with your extended family?
If it wasn't for my maternal grandma and grandpa, I would have been in very bad shape. They were very loving. They took the place of where my parents left off, they picked up. But I learn every day, I learn a different story when my mother is in the mood, even at 87, to tell something. They never abused my mother as parents. They were depression parents. They were poor. They owned a local luncheonette and worked almost around the clock. So she was left alone quite a bit, my mother. And that was the hardest thing for her. She wanted to have that family that would sit down to dinner as a family at 6 o'clock. It's interesting. As I'm saying it, I'm realizing the parallels in our life. And they were not able to do that. They were also very cheap. There's no other way to put it. And she always resented that. They were not good with money. And she had a very contentious relationship with them. She also fell in love when she was 15 with an Italian boy. And they not only broke up the relationship, they were very much in love apparently, but they sent my mother away to live with a relative. So these are, very difficult issues. On my paternal side, I did not know my grandpa Irving very well. He was sickly from the time I was born. He had Parkinson's disease. My grandmother was a very tough woman. As I described, she was very Fabicina. Her face was always pinched. And, as an adult, I realize now she did not have a very nice life. So how could I expect her to be, a warm, loving person? But as a child, I didn't want to go there. I didn't want to be part of it. It was a very cold household. They were very poor. They moved many, many times. And so that was it. My mother has a sister who's 5 years older than her. I'll give you an example. She's still alive. She's 92 years old. She speaks beautifully. I talk to her all the time. And she and my mother do not speak. They're both agoraphobic. And they both have these things. They won't pick up the phone. So, we're talking about a lot of stuff here. There's a lot of mishigas, a lot of dysfunction, a lot of craziness.
We did have someone ask if you knew the name of the jewelry store that your family owned in Toledo.
No, I asked my mother, she couldn't remember, but it was downtown. She said something about, is there a LaSalle Street or something? I looked up the house where they lived in. They lived on Kenilworth Drive. I looked it up on Zillow. I don't have a feeling that any of you still live in that kind of neighborhood. The house was built in 1915. It had 3 bedrooms and 1 bath. But my mother has wonderful memories of the Toledo community and going there on the train. And it was very, very special to her. And as I said, my husband's 102-year-old mother, who died 2 years ago, she was from Toledo.
All right. Are there any other questions? Well, I'd like to thank Lisa Novick Goldberg for joining us from down in Florida. And if you want to get her book, barnesandnoble.com, the store on Monroe Street has it on their display, Amazon.com. And Lisa kindly sent us signed book plates. So if anybody would like a signed book plate, just email me at registration@jewishtoledo.org. I'd like to thank the Federation and the Foundation for helping us host this event. And we hope to see all of you at our future events. Oh, somebody just popped up.
Kenilworth is an old Jewish neighborhood. You are an inspiration and delightful. Oh, thank you, SR. Thank you. I want to thank you all. I really appreciate it. I've loved doing this. Stay safe. Please stay safe, and have a nice holiday season. And thank you very much. Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and have a good evening.